Okay, we are ready for Joseph part 2, because remember the last time we were with Joseph, he was an important ruler in the land, but he still didn't know what happened to his father or how his brothers were doing. So we need to finish the story to see if they get back together. All right, so remember that years passed, and remember how Joseph was in charge of building buildings to store all the grain? So years passed and the famine did come to the land of Egypt. But it not only came to Egypt, it spread clear out to where Joseph's brothers were in the land of Canaan. Now, they were starting to get hungry. They were looking for different ways to find food. And Jacob had heard that in Egypt you could go there and you could buy corn for your family. Now, corn, you need to remember that you can actually grind up the corn and make it into like a little flour. Not as in like a flour you smell, like flour that you bake with, and so that they could make things and they could have food and it would be good for them. And so Jacob told his brothers that they needed to go and buy corn for them so that they won't die of hunger. That was a real thing. People were starving. And so he told them to go. Well, Joseph's older brothers, they traveled to Egypt to get food for their families. And Jacob did not let Benjamin go with them because he was afraid that the same thing that happened to Joseph would happen to Benjamin. So he was the youngest. He didn't want anything bad to happen to him. Well, the brothers, they took animals to carry the food back from Egypt. So, they carry it, it'd be empty. They wouldn't have anything on their backs. But then when they came back from Egypt, they'd hoped that they would be able to buy corn and bring it back to their family. Well, now Egypt is a hot, dry, deserty country, so they had to make sure that they had enough water and food for their long journey. And it was a long, hard trip to Egypt, hot and dirty, okay? Well, when they finally arrived in Egypt, they were brought before the ruler who was in charge of all the food. Now, who was the ruler in charge of the food? Right. It was Joseph. Okay? They bowed before the great leader and asked for permission to buy food and take it back to their families. They did not know that the important ruler that they were talking to was their own brother Joseph. They didn't recognize him. He looked like an Egyptian. He talked like an Egyptian. That's because he lived in the land of Egypt. He knew how to do all of that stuff. Okay? And so he did not tell them who he was. He recognized them, but they did not recognize him. Okay? Instead, he only spoke to them in the Egyptian language. He would have used what we call an interpreter. So that would be a person who would hear the Egyptian language and that knew the boys, well, they're grown men now, but knew the Hebrew language and would speak to them in Hebrew of what Joseph had said. And so that's kind of tricky because he actually knew the Hebrew language. That's what he grew up with. Okay, so he kind of asked questions about their families, and in that he was learning about his brother Benjamin and about his father Jacob. But he still did not tell them who he was. It would have been exciting for him to tell them that, and that he was their brother, that he had come up in the world. That means that he had become somebody important, even though he'd gone through lots of hard things. Well, after asking them some questions about their families, he did tell them that if they came back, they would need to bring that younger brother of theirs for him to meet that younger brother. That was Benjamin, okay? All right, so it was probably very hard for Joseph to send them away, not telling them who he was, not really knowing about Benjamin and his father. And so he sent them on their way, sad, not knowing if they would come back and he would get to see them again. Well, after a long time, Jacob could see that his family was getting hungry again. And he knew that he would need to send the sons, they weren't young anymore, but he would need to send them back to Egypt to get more food. The sons knew that it would be hard to talk their father Jacob into letting their younger brother Benjamin go with them. Because remember, the Egyptian ruler in charge of the food had said they needed to bring their younger brother Benjamin. Well, finally, when the food they had bought in Egypt ran out, they needed to go back to Egypt. They had to have more food. So Jacob did agree to let Benjamin go with them back to Egypt. This time, when Joseph saw his brothers and Benjamin with them, he had his servants prepare a special dinner for them to eat at his house. Wonder why this Egyptian is wanting to invite this family that's not even from Egypt into his home. Now the brothers might have been a little nervous, a little scared. Why would this Egyptian want to have anything to do with them? But they agreed to go to his house for dinner. Okay? Now at the dinner, Joseph told his servants to give all the brothers the same amount of food except for Benjamin. He told the servants to give him a little bit more food than the other brothers. Now it was a test. Joseph wanted to see if the brothers were still selfish and jealous and mean. But guess what? They didn't even seem to notice that Benjamin had more food than they did. And so Joseph was encouraged by that. All right, well, after one more test, Joseph knew that the brothers were ready to hear his secret. Joseph sent all of his servants out of the room, and then he talked to his brothers. He gathered them around and he said, "Hey, look at me. Look closely. Do you recognize me? I'm your brother Joseph, the one that you sold as a slave. Do you see me?" Now, do you think the brothers were surprised? If you could do a surprised face, what would it be? Ah! Oh no. Because they were a little bit scared, because Joseph was a ruler. He could have anything bad done to the brothers that he wanted. But that's not Joseph. Joseph loves God. He still loves God, and he's going to do things that please God. Okay? So, Joseph was not angry with them. He did not punish them for all that they had done to him when he was younger. He knew that God had taken care of him all that time. When somebody blamed him for something that he didn't do, God took care of him, even though he was thrown in prison. Okay? So, he was excited to see his brothers, but Joseph wanted to see his father too. So, he arranged for all the brothers and their family and for Jacob to come and live in the land of Egypt. He would care for them as long as the famine lasted. Well, the brothers went back excited to tell Jacob that Joseph was still alive. And so Joseph was waiting for his family to come to Egypt. When he heard that they were near, he ran out to meet them. What a happy time. Jacob and Joseph were finally together again. Joseph took his father to meet the king, to meet Pharaoh. How cool is that? Pharaoh was excited to meet Joseph's family, and Pharaoh gave the best land in Egypt to Joseph's family for them to live in. It was a wonderful time for Joseph and Jacob too. They had probably spent a lot of time talking about all the things that had happened during the time that they were apart. Joseph wanted Jacob to meet his two sons. Their names were Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay, so Ephraim and Manasseh got to meet their grandfather Jacob. That'd be pretty cool to meet your grandfather. And it'd be cool for the grandfather to meet two grandsons that he didn't even know he had. Well, Jacob was also able to meet Joseph's wife, and it was an exciting time for everyone. Well, the family lived together in Egypt for a while, and then something very sad happened. Jacob got old and passed away. He died there. Joseph had been very kind to his brothers while Jacob was living. So his brothers, they were a little bit nervous and scared that Joseph was only kind to them because Jacob was still living. And they thought after Jacob died that maybe now Joseph would get even with them. No, not Joseph. Joseph said, "No, you meant it for evil. You did evil things, but God meant it for good. God turned it out for good." And so he never got even with his brothers. Okay? So God helped Joseph to have a kind, forgiving heart. When somebody is unkind to you, and it's definitely not as bad as Joseph's brothers were, when somebody's unkind to you, don't get angry. Be forgiving. Let it go. Don't worry about it. God will take care of you. It's not a big deal. Okay, not really. Be kind, be forgiving, and be like Joseph. Joseph loved God so much and we need to love God too because of all the wonderful things He's done for us. All right, good listening.